Welcome back to Mitchell Talks Energy with Jerry Bohnen of OK Energy today, the Dean of Oklahoma Broadcasters. Always good to see you, Mr. Bohnen.
Good to see you too, Scott. We have a lot of energy development here in the past week since we've done the last podcast.
There has been. I've got a big three here that I got from OK Energy today. Can we start with, we're going to be talking a little bit about renewables here. Start with some big solar news, your lead stories today on Tuesday, and that is Enel, this company that wanted to put these solar panels manufacturing in Oklahoma. It's about to happen, correct?
Right. It formally announced Monday that it has chosen its solar manufacturing or solar panel manufacturing plant to be located at the Tulsa port of Inola. And that's where it plans to build this $1.8 billion solar manufacturing plant, courtesy of some incentives up to $180 million offered by the state of Oklahoma. Governor Stitt recently indicated that he had been in talks with federal officials trying to hasten the approval, the federal government approval of the actual permit for this operation. It'll initially they had planned on construction to begin late this year, with further construction in 2024, hiring at least maybe 1,000 employees, and by 2025 hiring another 900. And so, in order to get all of the money in terms of from the state of Oklahoma, Enel has to actually employ 1,400 employees. And so this was a major effort on the part of Enel as it enters into an expansion of renewable energy projects all throughout North America. This is Enel North America. Of course, Enel is based in Italy, where it has some manufacturing plants for solar panels I believe there's one in Italy, might be another one too across Europe. But Enel is more well known throughout Oklahoma for its 13 wind farms that it built in the state of Oklahoma. So, it's just simply expanding its effort and devotion to Oklahoma, building upon that renewable energy history. So it's really a major deal for Enel. We've been talking about this since they brought up the idea for the past couple of months, but the formal announcement came this week that it's Inola.
And it is, as the
And
president once said,
the other
it's a
thing
big
about
deal.
Inola, I just learned today, Inola is the hay capital of the world.
I
I'm
did not know
serious.
that.
Well, yeah, it proclaims itself of that, hay for livestock. And of course, a lot of ranches are in that area, a lot of hay production. So, hay capital Enola's making hay of it, right?
That they are no pun intended.
I know, poor effort, but anyway.
No, it's a good one. I forget about these little towns around the state that have this. I'm from the broomcorn capital of the world,
The
which is
what?
Lindsay. Yeah, Lindsay
Oh,
was the broomcorn capital of the world. It used to be on the masthead of the Lindsay News.
uh
The
huh.
broomcorn industry went to Mexico 40 years ago. I still have my Johnny knife, by the way. I can teach people how to cut broomcorn. It was
Oh, you
quite an
can.
art. Oh yeah,
Okay.
nothing like wearing long sleeve shirts in July at harvest time. It
Mm,
was some, but anyway, that's kind of typical of that part of the country, oil and ag,
yeah.
and that was a massive industry, the broomcorn industry, and it was just gone. The hay business is still here, and
Yes, it is.
it's been some
Well,
big prices on that.
yeah, and interesting that you bring that up because the USDA has been out with some crop production forecasts regarding wheat, and so we're talking about major wheat reduction in Oklahoma, Kansas, Texas. I know, when it comes to the wheat harvest, that's something very near and dear to me because I grew up in wheat country up in west central Kansas and cut a lot of wheat as a young man. But a lot of people around, at least in the Oklahoma City and Tulsa area, they have no clue about what's going on out there. But what we're seeing is because of the drought, wheat is just simply not growing. And I've driven in wheat fields of western Kansas where it's only about ankle high. And so farmers are not going to be harvesting a large segment of their wheat. In fact, I was on the phone with, I have a brother in west central Kansas, talking over the weekend. He knew a farmer near Ellenwood, Kansas. He had 4,000 acres of wheat planted, and he was only planning to harvest 180 some acres because of the drought.
Wow.
It was that bad. And so some of the wheat farmers in Oklahoma and Kansas and those other states, they will be cutting that wheat and turning it into hay for livestock feed. So it's a sad deal. But anyway,
I mean, it goes with the territories
it
sometimes.
does.
I was in Wayne, Oklahoma, which is right near Payne, Wayne,
Wayne
Payne,
and Payne.
etc.
Yes.
So I was driving back through the country the other day, back to northern McLean County, and I saw a lot of soybean fields that have drowned out in this part of the country. Right. So it's the drought was going crazy for a long time,
Hmm.
and a lot of these family farms down through there, they're not going to get crop because it's
Yeah.
drowned. I mean, there's
Yeah.
been so much rain. So not everywhere in Oklahoma, but that.
No.
Well, this Sunel story is a big story, and it's interesting because as we get to the end of the legislative session, there's some bargaining going on, and I know that Panasonic deal is still a bargaining chip between the House, I think, and the executive branch, and that had to do with some people think that we lost that Volkswagen deal. Was Volkswagen the one that went to Canada?
Yes, it
Okay,
did. And then we
so
lost the other one, uh, the battery making plant to Kansas City,
that
which,
happened, and then when that when that Volkswagen deal went through, the hot and heavy rumor was the Canadians threw in a lithium plant, which we don't grow in too much of that. But here's the segue. There's another OK Energy Today story, a big story about rags to, I guess it's riches to rags to riches sort
yeah.
of story where a company that's just got sold to ExxonMobil. I learned today from you that's called Big Shovel, but it deals with lithium. And that's one of your lead stories today. Take it away.
Okay, this is a company called Galvanic Energy. I had a story about Galvanic Energy last November, and I had a lengthy interview with its president and chairman, Brent Wilson. He formerly was an employee of Chesapeake Energy, and several years ago, when he and others were basically let go on a downsizing by Chesapeake Energy, he and some other companions, they were exploring at the time the development of lithium from brine, which is basically salt water. And so the story focused on Galvanic Energy's efforts to develop the lithium from the Smackover Formation in southern part of Arkansas. And just this week, then, ExxonMobil paid Galvanic Energy $100 million. That's $100 million for the right to basically lease the, what was it, 120,000 acres that Galvanic Energy had the rights to drill and develop, existing brine in that formation. So that's a big, big deal for Galvanic Energy and should be a shot in the arm for their lithium production or producing efforts. Lithium, of course, the critical mineral that is needed for development of batteries for electric vehicles. And, it's only going to get more and more development, that is, of the electric vehicles. I know Brent Wilson at the time indicated they were the tip of the spear in development of lithium throughout the United States. And so my story at that time, back in November of last year, was that they were sitting on a gold mine. He and his other companions who, gathered funding for this whole project. Well, it turned out to be quite a gold mine for them, $100 million. Of course, we don't know how much money they expended trying to develop their leasing efforts and development of lithium. And but nonetheless, that's nothing to sneeze at. $100 million.
I imagine there's some margin there.
Yeah.
I would think. Now,
I
and
imagine there's some celebrating going on too.
I would say so. And then hidden in that, not in your story, but in some of the other stories that you can link to from OK Energy today, is that it says a lot about ExxonMobil, doesn't it? I mean,
It
shifting
does.
away from just
Yes.
oil and gas exploration into what can you explain Big Shovel for us?
Well, not so much.
I mean, it's a
I can't.
nickname for the pivot away, right? I mean, that's the only thing I can really tell about it.
Well, ExxonMobil is just simply pouring billions into the renewable energy process. That's what's happening with some of these major companies. Chevron is doing the same thing because they apparently see the handwriting on the wall. It's kind of all of the above or diversify. And that's what they're trying to do because they see what's happening with the development of electrical vehicles. And in fact, in another development that we carried earlier in the month, a story about the Oklahoma Department of Transportation developing their EV charging network, in which they're getting 60 some $1 million in federal funding to do this. So, they've got a draft up now that they're pushing requests for proposals for bidding on the location of this development statewide of an EV charging network. So that's what ExxonMobil, Chevron, and a number of other big companies are doing. They're getting into this whole process of, exploration for lithium, and solar energy and the like. Renewable energy, it's not going away. It is being pushed through billions of dollars by the Biden administration, and whether you think their idea is grand or not, it's happening.
Yeah, and I mean, it's part of the deal that we've talked about, which is that there's some people that want to stay in the past and some that want to jump into the future, and there has to be a transition. And
Yes.
it's interesting in your story about the NL deal, it shows that our governor is talking to the president. I
Mhm.
mean, they have to work together. They like to, their press releases, they're all on
Oh, yeah.
islands and taking care of, but that's all nonsense. I mean, they have to work just kind of like our hydrogen deal. We're working with other states, Democrats and Republicans.
Yeah, Louisiana and Arkansas,
Okay,
and
so
other states are doing the same thing.
yeah, yeah, you've got to. It takes a lot of people to get this done.
Yeah.
So this is what Yahoo says. Big oil also knows it cannot afford to miss the shift to quote big shovel, a phrase used by Daniel Yergin, an energy and geopolitics expert, to describe the mining boom that will power the shift from a fuel intensive energy system to a critical minerals intensive one. ExxonMobil's new bet on lithium gives it exposure with all the potential upside and revenue and profits to the red hot market for EVs and batteries, which we're
Well, and
competing against
yeah,
CCP, right?
right, and that's why you're seeing some real critical battles over lithium mining in Nevada and Utah. And I mean, the tribes are putting up some furious battles because they contend that's some of their sacred grounds. On the other hand, I mean, it's gotten into a big political situation where governors want it and some U.S. senators don't. And it's just another example of the kind of environmental battles and fights that you're seeing all around the country. Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
that
you're seeing the same thing with the carbon capture. I mean, horrific fights are going on up in the state of Iowa and up in North Dakota. In Iowa, the landowners want nothing to do with it, and you're seeing some environmental groups that developed over the fight of the Keystone XL energy pipeline, and they were basically grassroots efforts, and they're extending now into the carbon capture. They don't trust this effort at carbon capture projects and the development of the pipelines that are having to come across their land.
I know that I've seen some contracts recently for people that companies in Oklahoma wanting to do carbon capture, and the contracts are really sloppy. It's so early on, even landowners. And I know one landowner who was like, "No, I'm not going to do this deal. There's this the contract is just too open ended. It's so early." You have a story about carbon capture in Colorado this week, big
That was
project up
the
there.
Yeah, Colorado School of Mines, working with a couple of other entities, received a $32 million contract in which they will develop a carbon capture project near Pueblo, in which is kind of a special mining, a special. I think it's a sandstone formation that they have there. So Pueblo was chosen because of the kind of emissions that are being produced by some of the coal-fired burning power plants at Pueblo, and they're going to be working in conjunction with the state of New Mexico as well. They think they can naturally capture the carbon out of the air and pump it down into the projects in that particular sandstone formation. So it's just another example of the kind of efforts that are being made. New Mexico likes to think, and they've been working with let's see, Colorado, I think Wyoming, and maybe one other state in developing their own hydrogen hub, similar to what that Oklahoma's trying to work with Arkansas and Louisiana. Just more examples of the kind of energy development of stories all around the country and around the world.
Halo, I believe they call it. Hydrogen is Arkansas, Louisiana, Oklahoma. And make
Exactly.
no mistake, behind the scenes, when you look at that, you got to deal with the administration. There's some Democrat senators in that group when you put Arkansas, Louisiana, and Oklahoma together. So the partisan line on this is just don't believe it. I mean, don't believe all of it because there's so much more behind the scenes. And I think also, and I want to get to our last story of the day, which is your big three of the day. But there's a story in OK Energy today this last week about what was happening at the G7. So we're talking about carbon
Oh,
capture and lithium batteries and hydrogen and all that. Make no mistake about our competition with China, and it's getting uglier.
oh,
And our
exactly.
delegation got into it.
Yeah. Well, I think it was 2 weeks ago, Congressman Tom Cole wrote in a newsletter to his constituents, and he discussed and focused on what he called China's economic coercion. In other words, basically threatening companies that defied them, and that if you didn't do this, well, we'll use our economic power that we want to, let's say, produce, computer chips for you, et cetera, et cetera. Here's China. Where do we get a lot of our medicines from? Well, China and healthcare products, right? And so Congressman Tom Cole was complaining, basically saying, we've got to end this sort of economic coercion being produced by the Communist Party of China. And it was discussed at the G7 in Hiroshima, Japan, where President Biden flew last week and attended that summit. And then at the same time, Representative Stephanie Bice has put in a request to Biden and the White House, wondering why a Chinese company was allowed to buy an educational site in the United States that was used primarily by young students and military members of the service. And so everybody's getting involved in the game, but it's politics to some degree. But at the same time, it's a different kind of politics, and it raises some legitimate questions, Scott, at least in the minds of some, that, why, if we're fighting China on one hand in regards to economic coercion, why are we allowing them to come in and take over control of American countries, which they can use that against us in a coercion effort?
There's an international symbol for what I think the answer is.
Yes.
I mean, it's like these people keep saying, well, the CCP is in Oklahoma buying up these farms. Friends of mine are
Hmm.
going, do you know where I can find one? I've got some
Yeah.
land out there I want to sell. So I want to get to the last story, which is we're going to do we should start having our segment each week and call it This Week in Rate Increase Hearings.
Yes.
But before I get to that, which is directly tied to what I'm about to ask, I just saw on OK Energy today, I read a story where that an agency that does the predictions on this is saying crude oil is going to go down. Now, we've been hearing, because I spend a lot of time on the financial pages, for the last 90 days, 120 days, the data is, I mean, the literature is replete with China's coming back into full capacity. They're going to suck up all the excess oil in the world. Energy prices are going to skyrocket, blah, 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 yada, yada. And then maybe 60 days ago, the OPEC Plus got together and said, we're going to cut production, we're going to jack up prices. And then I read in OK Energy today, this last 2 days, well, the ratings agencies and these forecasting agencies are saying we're going to have prices are going to go down. So inquiring minds who are confused
I am
are
too.
trying to figure out how this all works, Jerry.
Well, this report that you're referring to is coming from the U.S. Energy Information, which is EIA. And they were out with a report this week predicting that crude oil prices will fall through the remainder of 2023 and into 2024. Now, if you got, into the weeds of that particular report, as they like to say, uh, that they anticipate crude oil prices to increase until about September and then start making the drop. So, we're basically in the $70, you know, give or take range for West Texas Intermediate crude, which is the U.S. benchmark, and then Brent crude, which is the global benchmark. WTI is generally in the lower 70s. Brent is 75 to $80 a barrel. Depending on what kind of trading is going on. So I'm like you that it's confusing, Scott, that on one hand, the action by OPEC was meant to raise prices. It did for a little while, but it hasn't now. And so now this report is coming out, and surely it would, you know, basically affect prices. And we'll see what happens at the end of the day.
And on top of that, I just read in OK Entry today that AAA is saying we're going to see the biggest amount of travel over the next couple of the summer.
Yeah.
To be starting this week, I think, that we've seen since the beginning of COVID. So if that happens, I mean, the smart people say, well, you have all that much driving, you're going to see gas prices spike.
Mm.
I'm just having a
Yeah.
hard time figuring out if you're going to be having, if China's coming online and people are going to be driving while at the end of the
Yeah.
year that they think crude prices. You know what we'll do? I'll make a tickler. We should just come back in 6 months and see how wrong they were.
Exactly. Exactly.
So finally today, the much anticipated this week in rate hike hearings. So we've been talking about this for some time. Now this is a limited slice for me to be doing these episodes. Obviously, you've been doing this for a really long time. But is it just me, or are we seeing a parade of rate hike requests in front of the State Corporation Commission?
Yes, there is a parade. And I think what's happened, Scott, is it's come more and more to the attention of consumers, um, especially in light of the 2021 winter storm, where we saw all these requests made for securitization and the use of bonds. And now we're going to be paying, forever, 28 years in some of the cases for some of the utilities. But the one you're talking about today is a public service company of Oklahoma. It put in, okay, so what happens is companies have to go through their annual fuel adjustments. That's one aspect. And then they also can come back and do a request for a basic rate hike. And that's what PSO has done. $155 million. It was actually much, much more when they filed it back in November. But upon negotiations, they agreed to reduce it to $155 million, which, if approved by the Oklahoma Corporation Commission, would amount to another $3.57 for the average residential monthly bill. And so, even as we talk about this, Scott, the Corporation Commission held a hearing Monday morning, and it was it was a hearing before an administrative law judge. Now, two of the commissioners sat in on the hearing and listened to the testimony of PSO, at least one official, who was questioned first by PSO attorneys and then at length by an attorney for the Oklahoma Industrial Energy Consumers Group. And it really got quite interesting uh, because PSO was asking for things that, uh, well, they needed some IRS approval, and that approval has not yet been made. And so the ALJ, the administrative law judge, simply was hearing this and then would probably take it under consideration and then make a recommendation to the Corporation Commission. It's kind of um, it's hard to explain, but what PSO was asking for was a special IRS uh, approval for some of the rate hike request. Now, I'm not an attorney at all, and but under the questioning by the Oklahoma Industrial Energy Consumers attorney, it was brought out that they would assume that they would get that approval, but it hasn't been made. And so that attorney was basically raising the point, then how can you pass that along to consumers if you haven't received the IRS approval? And then at the conclusion of that questioning Monday morning, Corporation Commissioner Kim David basically asked the same kind of questions and made that point. And we're going to have to wait and see where the ALJ goes with that. But PSA, they admitted during the questioning, of the OIEC attorney, basically saying, "So you're asking for a rate hike request after you've gone through and you've gotten approval for I can't remember the total cost now for their renewable energy projects. That came just about 2 weeks ago. Remember all
I
the
do.
three solar farms and the three wind farms, and it was going to cost hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. I think what wasn't it like? I think it was $2.4 billion, and so that's another cost that was hit with that is hitting the consumers. Then you also have the matter of the winter storm bills, and that's what the OIEC attorney was raising, that very point. I guess he was suggesting, not to put words in his mouth, when is this going to end? And isn't it I guess from the utility standpoint, well, it's not going to end because every year we're going to come back with these kind of requests because prices are going up. We have inflation, different needs, and such. But from the consumer standpoint, when will it end?
Uh, that's a great question. We just had the wrap up of the second or the first review of the Mueller report. How far were we along on that one? That
Yeah,
Durham
I know.
fellow, the
That
judge.
that's another ballpark. Do we don't even want to get into.
Yeah,
We could be here all day long, and we
yeah.
don't want to do that.
That's 6 years on that. And the answer to that was, I don't know.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's exactly what I answered. Like umpteen
Well,
jillion billion
okay.
dollars.
I'll just delve into it very quickly. I'll ask you one question about all of those reports. I don't care whether you stand, for or against the reports, but it was clearly brought out that somebody had lied. Was anyone ever charged criminally for lying, and why not?
I don't, the only person that I know that went to jail over this was Michael Cohen. I mean, he pled guilty to it, but I don't know if it was in the lying aspect of it. He said, I mean, and subsequently he said it, but
Yeah, and
I
only
don't
one
know.
DOJ attorney was convicted, and I don't think much happened to him, for lying over the whole Russian collusion matter.
Right.
Anyway, but we don't need to get into it. We're
Oh
talking energy.
man. Yeah.
That's a lot of wasted energy here.
It's no pun intended. That's two no
Yeah,
puns. I have to say that, at some point I need to move on. Right. Like there's news being made every single day and the historians write the books. As Jerry and I were talking before we started taping, we're both interested right now in the lead ups to the Great War. which was World War One. We're just now getting into that. So we're 100 years late on that one, by the
I
way.
suppose so. That's true. I'm a history buff. I enjoy reading, all sorts of history about things like that. But, I guess, it's a word that I believe is overused, and that is closure.
Yeah. Well, we may mentally have to close on this one, but
Yeah.
as we were talking earlier, I mean, so many of these things have to be done with a team, and but that's not in the team talking points right now. We're about to move into primary season, and you cannot be seen to be working with the enemy or the opposition. That's poison for your primaries.
I suppose it is. But then you start raising that the whole issue of compromise. What is compromise?
Some people call it the noise of democracy, right? So
I suppose. Or is it a compromise if you finally do as I want? Uh,
could be. That's
for
in the
me, it's a
arts, right?
compromise. Yeah.
By the way, they're doing that right now as the legislative session wraps up. When you go back 60 days and see what leadership was saying about the education package, and there has to have been a lot of evolution in viewpoints to get to this compromise, which is, and I had a hot seat guest the other day about that. And so, I'm asking educators again, it depends on your point of view. It's either a great thing or a worst thing that ever happened. So
Hmm.
that's human nature.
I
Well,
know.
it's a jam packed bunch of stories this week on OK Energy
There are.
Today. And Jerry, for those who want to get up with their coffee like I do and read these reports done by the great Jerry Bohnen, how do people get on that?
Just simply go to OK Energy today and find the area where it says subscribe, and it's free. Just put your name and mailing address in there, and we'll send it to you every day, Monday through Friday.
I'm trying to get. I would do that if I could get my cursor to work. So I finally did. Okay, now I've got it ready to work. Well, it's always great to see you, Jerry Bonin. And as we
Good
go
dear.
into for folks that watch this, we're picking up a little each week. We just want to keep putting it out there for you. Follow me on Facebook, LinkedIn, uh, Twitter, if it's still running tomorrow, those sorts of things at Mitchell Talks. And it's Labor Day weekend and Memorial Day weekend. And that is a weekend that's not just
Oh,
about ball games and hot dogs, right?
well, and road travel. 82% of Oklahomans who travel will be doing so by car. So drive carefully out there.
And be careful at those cemeteries.
That's right.
Be real careful there. All right, Jerry, thank you. And we'll see you again next week.
You're welcome.
Glad to be joined this week by our friend, the executive director of the Hamm Institute for American Energy, Kenneth Wagner. Mr. Director, how are you?
I am doing fantastic, getting over the cold and getting my voice back. So it's good to talk to you.
Good to talk to you. Two or three brief topics today, since it's been a while since we talked. A big announcement today about a refinery in the Cushing area. I guess that's because the big news is it's a lot of money. Number two, I hear people all the time for the last decade, we need to build more refineries. I guess it's going to happen, right?
Well, and we haven't seen it permitted yet, but um, it's an exciting time because it's a modular next generation type refinery. So it's not the same refinery that we've known for 100 years. If you think about those refineries that were built really to support the war effort and then have been taken over commercially, you can think about the date of those. Nearly 100 years old now, and so this is an exciting time now. Uh, there hasn't been a refinery permitted in some time, and so it will be a test of that. We need the refining capacity. We saw that when gas prices spiked, that it wasn't supply of oil as much as it was refining capacity. And so I think the timing is really good. It fits our state's energy profile. It's in an area that has lots of feedstock in Cushing, the pipeline crossroads of America and of the world, really. It's a project that was talked about and being discussed when I was still secretary. but it's taken a while to get across the finish line. So I don't really know as much about it. It was announced today, the details as far as what the state ultimately participated in the incentive package, but I do know that if it's built, it's a win for Oklahoma.
That is absolutely correct. It seems like there was a lot of discussion over the last month about why aren't we getting these. It seems like the state's on a roll right now on some of these items. Next, I want to ask you about what's on everybody's mind right now, or should be, is the showdown that's happening in Washington over the debt ceiling and permitting reform, that aspect of it, and how that's involved. To go back to this conversation, which is something the media very seldom gets into, are about permitting. We've talked about that on this program before about how that the state of Washington does stuff to keep clean coal from leaving the country, how that Pennsylvania natural gas is blunted from getting to the East Coast, places like Maine. It's not about transportation or as much transportation or drilling or the production. It's about getting the stuff moved around, we should say, and the permitting to do that. You just mentioned that on the Cushing thing. So help us understand at a 10,000 foot level how permitting reform is working into this match that's happening in DC right now.
Right. So permitting reform happens across a lot of sectors, right? And so, our country, the system of pollution prevention is really built about keeping things from being built and restricting how they're built. Well, now we've got this massive infrastructure bill. We need pipelines to move hydrocarbons to get. We need pipelines to move CO2. We need pipelines to move hydrogen. All of those things. We need permitting to allow new areas on federal lands, for instance, to ensure we continue to have the supply of traditional energy that we need. And we've seen the Biden administration really block federal lands from being available for production. And so those are two areas that affect both supply and how we move things. But it also affects roads, bridges. It affects siting of um, any project that has federal financing has to go through the National Environmental Policy Act. You know it as NEPA. That can be a 2 to 10 year process. And so reform means reform across all of those platforms, and it's not just one technology, right? FERC, for instance, regulates interstate pipelines and primarily natural gas and CO2 and other things. But they also regulate transmission lines. And so, if we really want to modernize our grid, if we really want to electrify a great deal of our society, then we're going to need a far expanded, enhanced, and grown electric grid. And permitting reform is key to that as well. And so, what you're seeing is we've got this debt ceiling showdown, which is the government can't incur any more debt, and we're at a place where we're still in deficit spending. So you have to incur more debt to pay our debts. So if we don't, we would default on that debt. Our credit rating would go to a bad place. Debt would become more expensive. Chaos would ensue, and so it's really a bad place. I understand the idea that at some point we have to rein in our spending into meeting our means from what we earn, like we have to do as Americans. But what we're seeing is that the Republicans have tied permitting reform to this, and the Democrats. We saw this in Senator Manchin's bill, and at the end of last year, in the last Congress, is that Senator Manchin wanted widespread permitting reform as part of his support for the Inflation Reduction Act. And what we've seen is now that is the opposite of what's happened. That the Democrats said, yeah, we'll do permitting reform, but only on certain technologies. In other words, we'll help with renewables, we'll help with decarbonizing things, but if it has anything to do with carbon intense activities like hydrocarbon production, anything like that, even carbon sequestration, they've been resistant to that being a part of the package. And I think you'll see the Republicans not do permitting reform unless they can get widespread permitting reform, which really will drive down costs across all sectors, including the new energy.
So that's going to be something to watch. And ironically, it'll all get lost at the end. This is high noon. I don't know
Yeah.
who's playing Gary Cooper and how this is working out, but nonetheless, it's going down to the wire now. And so by the way, I get the best news you get on this are the financial networks. That's the best place to get the information.
Yeah.
If you want to separate out the politics out of this, there's obviously a bigger financial aspect of this. All right, last, and you were just talking about permitting reform and the war on hydrocarbons. It's never ceases to amaze me how that there are just so many people that think we just flip a switch and we go to net zero in one. It's just not going to happen. And people who read know this, but I'm thinking about something that is going to be happening up there at the Hamm Institute with Baker Hughes, the second Energy Frontiers Conference that's happening in a few weeks, which is when you look at the agenda on this, Ken, it's next level. It's not just about drilling and the sorts of things that the media obsesses about or wind turbines, those sorts of things. These are some of the issues that are really driving this discussion about renewables, the decarbonization, um, all of the aspects per meeting that surround the next level of energy. Give us an idea of this 2 day event and what's going to be happening in Oklahoma that's going to impact the world.
Well, again, this is Baker Hughes event. It's their second, they call it their Energy Frontiers Summit. Last year was Energy Frontiers Day. But the idea behind it is, you think of, a 100-year-old company like Baker Hughes that is one of the world's largest traditional energy service providers. But really, they have the entire spectrum of energy. They have their traditional oil field services, and then they have this equal line of business that is energy transition. And so, the Energy Frontiers is really about the business of, the technology of, innovating in issues that surround the energy transition. Around, that involve decarbonizing technologies like carbon capture, carbon sequestration, hydrogen, geothermal, um, digitization, how AI and other technologies are actually involved in that. And they bring, because of their network, they bring world renowned experts in research and development, the business side, investing, um, and certainly policy people as well. And so, just a really great summit to have at our facility. And what a great partner Baker Hughes is. Obviously, they donated the building to Oklahoma State that enabled all of this, and Mr. Hamm to ultimately give his gift. So. Um, I'm excited to be there. There's a great lineup of speakers, and Senator Langford's going to give a message, and so I think it's going to be a great event.
It will be. I've just looked at this. These are the sorts of things people just don't write or read about anymore. Nuclear, there's a session on nuclear for the future.
Yeah.
And whenever that you see news like we've seen this week where ExxonMobil was getting into the lithium business, which was an Oklahoma angle on that, it's just an amazing future. And for people that refuse to believe this fusion of the past and future are going to have to happen to get to the future, it's nonsense. It really is.
Well, I mean, I think what it really does is highlight why Oklahoma is such a great energy state, is because if you think about carbon capture and sequestration, that requires above ground, technology that we do deal with pipelines, with manufacturing, with production and refining. Then you go down, then you think about the subsurface of where we store it, and it's what oil and gas companies do. They I don't know many other companies that have reservoir engineers. They all have them. And so, you think about hydrogen again, we've talked about that many times. It really utilizes the full spectrum. A hydrogen production plant is a refinery, right? If you think about it, it's not the same refinery, but it is refining by separating the hydrogen out from whether it's carbon or using renewable energy, whether it's oxygen. And so we're building refineries in Oklahoma that are hydrogen. Geothermal is a subsurface, again, using oil and gas, skills to take that heat and use it for heating and power generation. And so nuclear is really the only one that kind of fits outside that, what I would call that traditional energy scope. And maybe that's why Oklahoma hasn't been a leader in nuclear technology. But all of these things are going to have to play together. And I can't think of anybody better than Baker Hughes to put on an event that would highlight those things.
We're we're due for a hydrogen update. There was a lot going on there. We need to do that at some point. And most Oklahomans remember Black Fox. If you're my age, you
Yeah.
remember what was going on about that. But you also remember a couple of years ago when the Germans wised up. Okay. And they wised up just in time. They were going to go get rid of their nuclear plants. And then this thing happened in Ukraine. I can't remember what that was, but
Yeah.
apparently they did
Well, it
they
took
did a
them
180.
Well, it took them a long time. They didn't immediately do that. They've only recently come to the conclusion that they need to keep their, nuclear is 30% of their power generation mix. And certainly it is an interesting dynamic. They had, held on to their decarbonizing socks as long as they could, and they were willing to refire up coal plants, but they didn't want to keep their nuclear running because they had made some big policy bets and decisions as a result of that.
That's why the all of the above approach it's the approach for the future.
Yeah.
So, former Secretary of Energy and Environment in Oklahoma, Ken Wagner, now the Executive Director of the Hamm Institute for American Energy. Mr. Secretary, it's good to see you. Look forward to seeing you again on Mitchell Talks Energy.
Always, Scott. Always a pleasure. Thanks.